Before any sort of regulations on guns?
No.
In the Constitution, it says there will be a well-regulated militia.
Correct.
Does it bother you that in the Constitution it talks about regulating them?
No. Because actually at the time, regulated mean well-trained.
Okay, and do you think that all Americans that have guns are well-trained?
No.
It's amazing to me how so many people think the word regulated in the Second Amendment meant controlled by the government. But as I've exposed in previous videos, this can't be further from the truth.
Although it's also the one right that uses the phrase well-regulated.
John believes well-regulated means controlled or supervised by the government. In the late 18th century, when the Second Amendment was written, well-regulated did not mean controlled or supervised by the government. It meant well-functioning. Well-regulated in the 18th century tended to be something like well-organized, well-armed, well-disciplined, says Rovote. It didn't mean regulation in the sense that we use it now, in that it's not about the regulatory state. There's been nuance there. It means the militia was in effective shape to fight. In other words, it didn't mean the state was controlling the militia in a certain way, but rather that the militia was prepared to do its duty. Keep in mind, that's coming from a constitutional expert who won a Pulitzer Prize for history.
Now, in all fairness, the guy being interviewed was mostly right, but he would have been better off saying well-functioning instead of well-trained, because I knew the moment that he said well-regulated meant well-trained, I knew they were gonna jump on this. Hell, the title of the video was, "This Second Amendment enthusiast admits Americans with guns aren't well-trained." But is he wrong? Most Americans with guns aren't well-trained, because becoming well-trained with a gun is prohibitively expensive, and our government spends more time trying to use training as a barrier to owning a firearm instead of making it an incentive. Most people barely have enough money and time to go to the gun range for fun. Much crazier is what some people were saying in the comment section of this video. Like this guy. At the time the Second Amendment was written, it was law for all men to serve in the militia when called upon, and they had to supply their firearms as well. Outdated and no longer applicable, but don't expect the deplorables to actually understand historical context. No, my friend, it's clear that you don't understand historical context about why the Second Amendment was written and what it was for and what it was doing. The Second Amendment wasn't giving instructions to the people. It was an instruction to the government telling them what they can't do. Who but the government would infringe on the right to keep and bear arms? Why would the people infringe on their own right to keep and bear arms? And why would the founding fathers need to write a document telling us not to infringe on our own rights? Yes, the people just got done fighting a war against their own government at the time and knew that if at any point this new government became tyrannical, the people would need arms to maintain their freedom. Hence, the first part of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, i.e., in order to keep these people free, they need to have access to firearms. So, government, you can't infringe on their right to own firearms, because if you become tyrannical, these people will keep you in check. It's really that simple. Then there was this doozy of a comment. If at the time the well-regulated meant well-trained and arms meant a one-shot musket, there's a deal to be struck here. I'm sure Steven thought that was so clever when he wrote that comment, but it's really just common sense. But apparently common sense ain't so common. So you're telling me the founding fathers had enough foresight to protect the people's right to bear arms in case of a tyrannical government, but not enough foresight to know that firearms would advance over the time. That's why they said arms instead of muskets. Not as bright or smart as you clever as you think you are.